Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's amazing discussion on growing through mentorship, how to be a great mentee and an even better mentor. We've got three of the best in the business here with us today, and I'm really excited about this conversation. It hasn't come up, we haven't done anything like this in about a year and a half, and it's a super important topic, and it wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Catalyst. Huge thank you to them. But before we jump into this, we have a tradition in all of the digital events that we do. And Junan, Mary, and Haley, really excited to have you all. But because you're all first-time guests, we do like to learn a little bit more about you before we jump into the deep stuff today. We'd love to learn from you just one thing that you're excited about now that the world is starting to open up. Just one thing, a chance to learn a little bit more about you. And Haley, let's start with you on this. We'll go right to left on my screen.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you for teeing this up. I'm excited to be here as well. I'm excited to travel again. I'm actually relocating from Denver to San Diego in 3 weeks. So with the world opening up, I am willing to move and experience new things.
That'll be fun. Trading the snowboard for the surfboard.
Yeah, mountains to ocean. Good trade-off.
Not bad. Thank you, Haley and Mary.
Yeah, so I echo definitely what Haley said, but I'm going to add to that. I am a hugger, and I have missed hugs from people that aren't in my immediate family. And so other than hand hugs, I'm actually going to start grabbing people and hugging them again. Yeah, so watch out, you guys.
Big hugs. When we're first in person, we'll know who Mary is because she's the hugger. I got the list right there. And then last but certainly not least, Junan, what about you? Anything?
I think we're all going to have some similar themes. I actually just booked my first international trip in so long to Ireland, so I'm so excited to be traveling again in the next few months. So I think that's probably the biggest thing on my list.
As the world opens up, I think the airlines are getting ready for it too. So it's exciting stuff. Hugs in Ireland with some surfing. I think that could be a fun. Maybe we do an event on that too. But folks, we got a lot of ground to cover here today, so we're going to jump right into it. Thank you all for taking some time today. And for those of folks that are joining us today that maybe aren't aware, modern sales pros and modern customer success and our related communities are some of the world's largest communities for revenue leaders. These communities exist to help our members see around corners that they may otherwise not know of, and also help you learn something that or uncover challenges that you may not be aware that you had, and also answer questions you may struggle to solve on your own. Pretty awesome experience. And if we advance the slide here, you'll get a sense of all of the different organizations that are in the community. And one of the great parts, as I was saying to Junan before, is it's a great experience to get your questions answered from across all of these different organizations. You can get perspective from any one of these or a bunch when you ask a question. Everything we do in our community is free for members, and certainly encourage you to join afterwards. But today wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Catalyst. Catalyst is an amazing CS solution, and it really does help you better understand what your customers are doing and then take action on the different behaviors that they have. They recently launched an email product, which is amazing, gives you the opportunity to actually engage with customers at the right point in time in an automated fashion, as opposed to having to give Mary a call and just say, hey, Mary, how are things going? Amazing solution, and we're really grateful for them for sponsoring today's session. But enough about Catalyst, enough about modern sales pros. If you like great programming, we've actually got one more event coming up for you in July. We're talking today about mentoring and mentorship. An important part of that is transparency and understanding who you are and who you aren't. Organizationally, that's also incredibly important. We've coined our little clickbaity title for our 3-day virtual summit, affectionately known as The Funnel is Dead. This is all about bringing your organization, instead of thinking function out, thinking customer in terms of how you build your revenue processes. And for that, you can register. We've got great sessions throughout, and really hopefully you'll be able to join us. But enough about me, enough about modern sales pros, enough about Catalyst. Let's actually meet our panelists here. And today we're going to be talking about mentorship and growing through it. First, we're going to start with Mary. Mary, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Richard. And by the way, customer in, I love that thinking. So Chief Customer Officer at Glint, which is part of the LinkedIn family. My team is responsible for the entire customer journey post-sale. So really exciting ride that we have every day. And mentorship, I think you wanted me to talk a little bit about what mentorship means to me, right? So I think of it as surrounding myself with a lot of different people that are really a complement to the areas that I need to work on, and the people who really inspire me and do the things in a way that I would really love to do them.
I'll go next. Hey, everybody. My name is Janan Pang, and I am the Director of Customer Success for our West region here at Slack. And mentorship is super, super important for me. I think the way I think about it is it's not about learning things that you can read in a textbook or go and research online, but it's how do you kind of gain more experiences and expand and broaden your experiences beyond the one that you're currently you have. And so kind of to Mary's point around surrounding yourself, I feel like I've gotten everything I have learned to be as a leader and as a professional, I think that's to the credit of all the mentors that have guided me along the way. So I'm super excited to take part today. Thank you for having me.
And I'm last. I'm Haley Miller. I'm a customer success manager at VMware. And to me, I think mentorship is essential. Mentors can lead to huge changes in your life. And I just think having a mentor is a powerful asset, both professionally and personally. If you find the right mentor, they can help you get a new job, get a new promotion, and take risks that you weren't even thinking that you'd have the ability to take. They really just push you to be like a better person. Not to sound really cheesy there, but I really that's what I've gotten out of my mentorship. So I'm really excited to talk about that today.
And don't worry, Haley, Junan, and Mary, we're going to break that down. It's not just going to be touchy-feely. Mentorship feels really good, and it's a really amazing thing, but we're going to dive into it a little bit. Just 2 housekeeping notes for everybody here. First things first, we've got these amazing panelists till about the top of the hour. Please do throw any questions that you have in the Q&A panel. We've also got a little poll up here. Please go ahead and complete that. That's going to be helpful for us as we start to shape the content. And with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I mean, it's not enough just to say, hey, use the Q&A panel and upvote and respond to others' questions, but let's talk about mentorship. And when we sat down with Junan and Mary and Haley, we talked about what this means and what perspective we wanted to bring to it. So we're going to go through these couple areas today. Please do keep this interactive, ask questions. There's a bunch of folks who asked questions during registration, but we're going to start with why to invest in mentorship and the benefits that you get of being a mentor, how to be great at both of those things. I think it can be a little bit of a loaded term, mentorship. Talk about common challenges, and then get to how to get started with this, how to actually make the most and find your next mentor or mentee. Junan, Mary, Haley, ready to jump into it?
Let's do it.
Do it. All right. Well, let's get started. And I think one of the unique perspectives that we have on this panel is, Haley. Haley shared some interesting stories with us about how she got into her role. But when you think about mentorship, let's start with you, Haley. What are some of the benefits to invest that you get from being a mentor, and some of the things that you get kind of organizationally from investing in this?
Yeah. So I kind of spoke about this earlier, but mentors are just, they're a huge game changer. I think it's really important to invest the time into finding a mentor that's a good fit for you, and kind of defining what you want out of a mentor relationship. As someone who's newer in my career, my mentors have helped me overcome the lovely imposter syndrome that a lot of people fresh in their career have. They've helped me break into my job as a CSM at VMware. My mentors helped me learn how to advocate for myself and helped me with very valuable interview advice and things like that. It's a game changer, honestly, having someone out of your organization that you can talk to about these things.
It's a huge benefit for that. And then is it something where, you mentioned a lot of your benefits, but do you feel like you imparted some knowledge back maybe to your mentors as well as you were going through this process?
Yeah, definitely. So I have people from, that are want to start out their career in customer success, and people that reach out to me on LinkedIn and just want to kind of like chat. And I think that, you know, I've passed down that knowledge to other people. Like it's like a chain almost, you know, like I learned from my mentor and I can pass that knowledge on to someone else. Like it's a, you know, huge plus and good networking as well. So.
Oh, it's great. Phenomenal networking. And Mary, I'd imagine too, it gives you a chance to codify some of your thinking about maybe processes or problems, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the things that I've learned, I was really excited to get into mentorship after having been a mentee, you know, for several years, and sort of help share the lessons learned along the way and some of the things that, you know, you had to struggle through in your career so that you could help others not struggle. And what I really learned is that mentors are also mentees all the time. So I've been challenged on, you know, have you thought about this? Or did you guys try that? Or, you know, those kinds of questions, which prompt, you know, additional, you know, thinking for me and help me with my career even further. So mentors, I think should definitely think of themselves as mentees during the journey too. It's definitely two-way. The other thing I would add is I've learned that, you know, one formal mentorship relationship doesn't have to be all mentoring is, right? You can have tons of mentors at any given time, and it sometimes can be a quick, you know, 15-minute exchange every 2 weeks just to check in, things like that. So it doesn't have to be super formal structured and with one person. So kind of expand the way you think about mentorship.
I think it's an interesting perspective, and we'll talk more about how to be kind of successful on both sides of it. But Junan, one of the things that you had said was this is an interesting way to have outsized impact, right? Everybody wants to have more impact in their career. How can you talk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I just think about for myself, as I mentioned earlier, so much of who I am today has kind of come from the work and the guidance that I've been given over time from my mentors. And so I think about that as paying that forward. And if I can have some tiny little impact on somebody to help shape them as a leader, and then that continue to cascade, and they can kind of help to grow the future, you know, of themselves as well as other leaders for them as they pay it forward. That is just like the ultimate career satisfaction, and that, you know, you get to help build this like future generation of leaders. Like, I don't know how much more impact you can have than that.
It's a little bit like, you know, you get to sort of franchise some of your thinking, right? As a mentor, it's kind of like, oh, I picked this piece up from Junan, and then I picked up this piece from Mary, and this piece from Haley, and I put it in a pot, and that's my style now. That's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's also a super mature way to think about like how you gain and pick up and piece together experiences, because then you can kind of make build the best possible thing for yourself.
I think it also, like we were saying before, it kind of pressure tests some of the ideas too that you may have here. And it looks like our poll results are in. So let's put those up on the screen for everybody to see here before we start to talk about how to be a great mentor. Let's see here. All right, so folks have mentors or are looking. Interesting. Interesting results here. Well, we're about 50-50 on do you currently have a mentee? So maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. And Mary, let's start with you. If you're a mentee looking for a mentor, how do you make sure you make that relationship really, really valuable? From being a great mentor and a great mentee, right? Because it's not just as easy as, oh, let's just grab coffee and shoot the breeze for 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, there is some of that. And the benefit, you know, can only go so far, because if you don't know what you want out of the relationship, it's really hard to determine if you're actually getting it. Right. So I think the first thing is just to determine what do you really want to work on as a priority, and then who, from a mentoring perspective, have you seen, you know, present, or maybe articles from someone or someone at work who gives great presentations, and you're like, I want to do that. The worst thing the worst that can happen is they say no. So you should definitely ask, put it out there. Don't be afraid to ask. And then I think just lay out what are the key objectives that you want to get from the relationship, and also what can you bring, because that's also something that will, you know, attract the mentor to say yes as well.
And when you think about that, what would be something that you could bring? Like if I'm going to, let's say, Julian for mentorship here, maybe I've got enterprise experience and he's got product-led growth experience. Is that what you're talking about? Just to make sure we're clear for our audience.
Yeah, there may be things that you have experience in a certain industry or with a certain segment, and you might be able to just say, "Hey, I would love to bring my knowledge of working in this industry to our conversations as well," which may be helpful in the role that you're currently playing.
I dig it. That makes a ton of sense. And then, Julian, from your perspective, what's the role? How much preparedness do I have to have if I'm a mentor or a mentee to be great at those things?
I think the onus is on the mentee, a good chunk of it, to come prepared, and to Mary's point, to be intentional about what you're looking for from that relationship. So I think, like, thinking through, as Mary said, like what you're looking for, I would say that, like, a lot of the mentorship relationships that I've taken part in, they don't actually start off as somebody saying, "Hey, will you be my mentor?" But they start off with saying, "Hey, would love to chat about this," or "would love to get your advice or guidance on XYZ." And then that starts to build a relationship. You talk through that challenge, you talk through kind of the advice and the experiences, and then that builds over time where you can kind of expand to other discussions and topics. But you gotta have to start with something.
Yeah, and with that, let's double click into that just a tick. Is that a specific skill, like Mary was saying, like, "Hey, yeah, I saw you're a great presenter. I want to learn how to do that," or is it sometimes more broad? Can you help me understand that?
I think it can be both, right? Like, I think you can have a mentor that's really good at some of the soft skills. Like, you mentioned presentation. I think there's someone I think of that, like, best presenter I've ever seen, would love to learn from them and how they approach that. But also, there's somebody that, like, just makes really great decisions and doesn't kind of stress or, like, overthink things. And I would love to, like, learn how they think through things like that. So I think you can kind of approach it either way. Just be intentional about, what you might be looking for.
Huge point there, right? Figure out what you want from the mentorship and what you can bring before you go and say, "Hey, Haley, will you mentor me?" Like, have a little bit of a thought of what you can bring and get out of that. Haley, I wanted your perspective on this, as well as somebody who's kind of at a stage where folks are reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, how the heck did you do what you did?" Right? So can you share a little bit more about what you think you need to be a great mentor and great mentee?
Yeah, well, Mary and Janan hit the nail on the head. Like, I think, coming in with your goals for the mentorship and what you want to get out of the relationship, like, is the most important thing. And I do sincerely believe that it's on the mentee to drive the relationship and come in prepared, almost like have have an agenda made, have specific questions that you want to ask, figure out how you're going to measure your goal. Like, are you getting everything out of the mentorship that you can? And to me, mentorship is a partnership. To kind of going off of what Mary mentioned, both people benefit from being in a mentor-mentee relationship. So I do want to stress that point, that I think mentors they are volunteers, but hopefully they get things out of having a mentee as well.
That's a great points, right? Being prepared, being intentional about this. One question that I know always comes up with this, and we've got a bunch of folks that are looking for a mentor right now. Mary, I want you to think about the last person that you started mentoring. How did that person approach you? Just so we've got kind of a success story. And then we can also talk maybe in general about how you'd recommend, because you said, "Hey, just ask." It's a big risk for some people. Gets a little bit uncomfortable for some.
Yeah, it's really, actually, it's an interesting story. I'm sort of thinking back around several, both when I've, approached people and been approached, but I did a reference for an old colleague for a completely different role than customer success. But the customer success leader was someone who was in the interview process. And so anyway, we met that way, and started chatting. And she basically said, "Hey, would you mind if I follow up with you and ask, pick your brain about, like, these 3 challenges that we're currently having?" I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be great. Like, yeah, let's start a conversation." And so it's just really as easy as that. We've met monthly. I've also gotten a ton of great information from her. So it was just a really, like, you never know where you're going to meet someone and be able to, get some mentorship from it. Just one other quick point that I wanted to make based on what Junan was talking about earlier is it doesn't have to be like, I think we think about it like I'm your mentor, you're my mentee, but there's so many relationships of give and take that we have that you don't have to think about it like, will you be my mentor? Isn't something you have to say. It's not like dating, like, will you go with me? It can be, but I think that's a really important thing too, is it doesn't have to be so overly formal, like, right? Just approach someone and say, can we have a conversation?
Mary, just to jump in there, I think your first point around, or that story you told around finding somebody throughout like an interview process, I think that's actually the wonderful thing about customer success and mentorship, in the sense that everybody in customer success, and I'm just going to speak for everyone in the entire industry, in that like we are constantly striving to build connections and to share knowledge. And so like that conversation of saying, hey, like would love to pick your brain about XYZ, like I think that's a perfect way to start, because most of the time, like people, no matter what your level is, everybody's looking to just share and learn more about different perspectives around customer success.
I think it's great. And I think back to that relationship point. I mean, sometimes the best relationships are over a beer, and it's just one beer and it's one conversation once in an airport, and you're like, wow, that person changed my perspective on this thing. So I think that's another piece of it. And as we think about kind of how to make sure that we avoid some of the common challenges that mentors and mentees have, I think that's an important part, right? The Junan, back to your point, the intentional, right, and being deliberate about it. But what else, as we think about this, what are some common challenges that you've seen or you've heard from others that arise from sort of mentor-mentee relationships? And Junan, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah. It's actually kind of been said a little bit from both Mary and Haley, in the sense that I think a lot of time mentees will kind of take whatever a mentor says at face value, and they'll just kind of accept it and then just never ask any kind of follow-up questions. They'll just use, either they agree with it and then they'll go do something with it, but they'll never really understand like the logic behind it, or they'll disagree with it and they just won't do it. And then like that kind of reflects poorly in terms of follow-up and action and things like that. So what I would say is, if you're receiving advice, ask questions, talk through the logic, not necessarily saying like challenge or like be combative, but like you want to really deeply understand like, why is that mentor giving you that type of guidance? And worst case, you learn more about like why they are recommending something like that. And then best case, I think Haley and Mary touched on this, like you could actually help refine that and tailor that recommendation to exactly your situation as you understand and talk through that with the mentor.
A little bit like understanding the first principles, or like, oh, that's a great framework, but what were you experiencing when you came up with this? How did it come about for you?
Exactly.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that real fast, if you take someone's advice and act on it, the next time you talk, maybe tell them how it went. Tell them, I did this and it worked great, or I did this and like, it actually didn't work, but then I did this instead. Provide feedback. That's how the mentors learn from you. So don't be afraid to do that.
I'm going to just throw a plug out there to like close the loop. Anytime somebody does something nice for you is probably a good way to live, right? Like if you get introduced to somebody, thank that person who introduced you regardless. Same kind of thing here. Haley, you mentioned some folks that are maybe a little bit more junior in their career that are getting started. What are some of the common challenges that you see in your mentor-mentee relationship with them?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but just coming in prepared and knowing what you want to get out of the relationship, I think is a huge part of a mentor-mentee relationship. Like, it's kind of the worst if you get on a call and then, as a mentor and you're like, okay, how can I help you? And then you don't know like how to kind of go with the conversation, like if you come in as a mentee, I always come in with an agenda and it's a shared doc, and I put the questions in beforehand, and I, let them know when I have the questions in there, and I put in follow-up notes and things like that. Like, I think going in prepared to a mentor-mentee session as a mentee is one of the most important things you can do.
Well, and it seems like that. I mean, look, we're all really, really busy here, as evidenced by how tricky it was to get us all together for this. But Mary, I mean, where does that fall? Is that on the mentor? Is that on the mentee? Is it a shared responsibility to kind of make sure the conversation is effective?
Yeah, I think in terms of just keeping the relationship going and carving out time, I think there's dual responsibility there. I do think the agenda and sort of communicating back to Haley's point, like what's working, what's not, is up to the mentee to do to make it the most successful. I will say the mentoring relationships that I've seen be the most successful are the mentees who've come with a list. And when we do follow up, they are sort of tracking, this worked, this didn't work, this is why. And then we sort of talk about what's next, right? So there's never an end to the meeting without action steps. Whereas a lot of other mentoring interactions have been sort of mindset shift or just kind of strategic thinking. And so no action really coming out of it. And there's just not, you can just see there's just not as much progress made if you don't get to the action.
It's back to, it's really bringing it home, right? So here we were talking, I'm getting mentorship on presentation skills, and I get a great prep tip from Haley. I gotta go put that into action, right? I'm not going to just do that from like, oh, well, I'm going to think about that maybe, but no, that I think makes a ton of sense. And the weird part about this too, I think people put it, and Julianne, I think you said this at the beginning, right? Like people put this mentorship thing like over here, and then we have the way we run our business and our business life over here. And it's almost like it's a one-on-one with this person, and you can make it what you need to as the mentee. And it's important to do that. One other question I would say that, and this came up a couple times during registration, is kind of the length of time that you maintain a mentor-mentee relationship. And I think that question says a lot, and we've answered a little bit of like, well, hey, it depends. But Haley, in some of the relationships that you have, what's that mentor-mentee length look like? Is it once? Is it a cup of coffee? Is it a bunch of times? What's a frequency you think may make sense to get started with this?
Yeah, so it depends. I
Depends.
say.
That's a common answer to every question that's ever been asked on this show. It depends.
Yeah, it depends. But you know what Mary was saying, I think you used like the dating analogy. Like it, like it can go on for forever. It can be a one day, and it's just like you get out of what you can from the relationship and like see what happens. Like, I think it's important to, if you go on the one date, maybe keep in contact with them, of course, say thank you afterwards and things like that. But it's okay if you have a session with someone that you wanted to maybe be your mentor, and you met with them and you're like, I don't know if like this is mutually beneficial for both of us. Like that's okay. Like it's almost like dating. And I think that's why it completely depends. So.
I think to add on to that too, like the long-term mentorship relationships, it's also okay if you go a week, a month, a quarter, almost like, 6 months without talking. Like that's totally fine. Because I know that like some of the mentors that I rely on, I maybe haven't talked to in a year, but I'll pick up the phone and call them when I have something I'm working through, and they will be there in an instant for me. And I think that's the kind of like depth of relationship you start to build over the years.
Mm-hmm.
It comes back to a lot of what we were saying at the beginning. It's kind of like, what are you in it for? If you're a strategic thinking, problem solving, really like, how many of those do you get? It's not like you're dealing with that like presentation skills, which is maybe you're doing that a little bit more. So that's, I think, another point to be deliberate and intentional about what you're looking for out there.
I would just add on that I do think that might be the hardest part overall, is actually determining when there is sort of this mutual, time to stop the mentoring, especially when it's formal and you're meeting on a cadence like monthly, because it feels like, to me anyway, that one or the other is kind of afraid to say, I don't think that these are valuable anymore because you don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, et cetera. But I think to your point, Richard, like really assessing, what are we getting out of it at this point? Why did we start? And have we gotten to where we need to be? And even reevaluating like what cadence makes sense. To Junan's point, maybe let's touch base in a quarter or 6 months and just see what's going on. So it is okay to bring it up and you're not going to hurt their feelings to just say, let's make the most of our time together. And maybe we move it out a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's probably, we can consider it safe that everyone is very busy right now. And I think a lot of folks would be like, yeah, I could use another half hour back in my day, especially if it's not mutually beneficial. We started to talk about this a little bit before. Finding mentors, right? We've got a bunch of folks that are looking for that. Mary, you provided a little bit of context, but Haley, let's start with you. Where can folks go, or what are some of the organizations that you've seen where they've got a slam dunk, great mentor-mentee relationship mentoring program?
Yeah, well, so Catalyst is an easy place to sign up for, it's more of a formal mentor-mentee sign up portal. And then there's also Women in Customer Success. And, a lot of bigger companies have internal mentorship mentee programs. So, look into that, see if your company has that. And then besides programs, like I would just say, like, when you have specific goals that you'd like to get out of a mentorship, like look within your network. Who do you know that you look up to, and who do you know that's really good at presenting? Going back to the presenting example, like, can you reach out to them? Or do you think that your network knows anyone else somewhere else that can introduce you? Don't be afraid to use your current connections on things like that.
And then I want to flip it back to you as well, because you were talking about it before. How do you think about taking on new mentees as a mentor, right? Because you mentioned you had folks kind of reaching out to you, hey, how did you do it? How do you think about, like, do I have time for another mentor or another mentee?
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Like, just like, I think that it just completely depends, I guess, on everyone's bandwidth and like their work levels and things like that. Like, if we're going back to the it depends question, but I think like just getting the question on LinkedIn, like, hey, like, can I pick your brain on, like, can I just pick your brain? Like, that's not specific. Like, okay, what do you need to pick my brain on? Like, maybe have like an example when you initially, if it's a blind reach out, then have an example on what you want to pick their brain on. Things like that, then I would be way more prompt of replying if I know what your goal is at the beginning.
It seems like there's a little bit of specificity we want to deliver. That, hey, I listened to you on X, Y, and Z podcast. I loved your comment about this. I'd love to pick your brain about that. I'm having this challenge.
Yeah.
Some of the basics there, folks. I don't think that's groundbreaking, but again, we put mentorship over here, and a lot of what we do in business in a different bucket, and they're not dissimilar. And Mary, what about you? Where do you suggest folks can find mentors, for different skills or things that they're developing?
Yeah, I think, and Haley touched on, of course, LinkedIn is a great channel for that, but also conferences or newsletters you come across or articles. Sometimes, you do pick out certain things that someone's talking about that hits exactly to something, a challenge you're working on, or a passion that you have, that you find someone who sort of shares the same thinking. And that's when it sort of prompts you to say, okay, I'm going to reach out to that person. And again, that's a more formal kind of way of thinking about it. But I think just being aware of the people that, surround you on a daily basis at work. Are there people who maybe are operationally really good and you're sort of struggling with part of the operations of your job? Is there someone that you can just, form a peer-to-peer sort of mentorship with informally to get some boost, to your knowledge and skills?
I think there's a lot there. And then Junan, what about you? What would you recommend for folks to find mentors in this space?
Yeah, I think to build on Mary's point around the people all around you at work, one area that I have found a lot of success in is actually asking my coworkers for recommendations of people that they feel like are really strong experts or really respected in a certain area. So don't just think about kind of like the first connection with a LinkedIn plug there, but like think about the second connections that like your immediate coworkers could potentially introduce you to.
And I think it's something too where we've all got various alumni associations and local groups that we're a part of, whether it's, you're in this region, so there's a meetup for CS leaders, or there's a meetup for salespeople, or whatever it might be. But also, oftentimes there's regional alumni associations as well from university or even from big companies. A lot of folks have alumni associations. I'm ex-Microsoft. There's a Microsoft alumni group. Interesting to think about, but that's an opportunity for you to reach out to others that could be interesting and could be compelling to learn from. Folks, we've got a little bit of time left here. We went through a whole lot quickly. It was a very dense, quick conversation. Thank you all for being caffeinated today, myself included. I'm going to give everybody just a couple seconds here. We've got time with our panelists for a little while longer. Please do bring some questions in here. I've got a few that I'm going to pull up here, but give everybody just a second or two to get some questions in. Let's see what we've got here. Pulling up our registration questions. I should have, bad moderation on my part. I didn't have it open on my third screen here.
Three screens, Richard. That's impressive.
I'm trying with commands. With Better Snap Tool, you can take one monitor, and it's Windows Vista. Best feature ever built was the ability to snap to different screens, and there's a tool for the Mac that does it. So I've got a setup that I usually run in, but not quite there yet. There we go. Oh, that's what I was looking for.
While you're doing that, Richard, I can't remember. I know Juna and Haley, we've chatted before. One of you mentioned, I think, thinking about having mentors as like your individual board of advisors, like companies have a board of advisors, right? And you need to surround yourself with all different experts, and also they change over time based on like where the company is in maturity, right? And I love that analogy because I think it really hits the mentorship, really well from an individual perspective. You need to surround yourself with lots of different experts and also continue to evolve and mature your own board of advisors.
It's a hugely, it speaks to the interdisciplinariness of being successful, especially with sales. It's a little bit different, but the customer success is a new discipline on the scene, right? Let's call it 10 to 15 years old. We've been selling stuff since there was stuff to sell. Successing people after they bought it, something a little bit newer. So if you assume there's not just one way to do it, there's probably not only one right way to do it. There's all different perspectives. So back to Junan, I think your point was earlier about also the nature of the people that get into the discipline are likely to make connections, but there's a lot of space to cover there. And the board of advisors or the board of directors is a really, really great analogy. Some of the questions that we came in that were actually relatively popular during registration. The first one that I want to tee up is, how do you know when you're ready to be a mentor, right? Is there some point where you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm ready, I can mentor? And Mary, let's start with you on this one.
It would be great if it was sort of that magical moment where you go, oh yeah, I'm ready for that role. The reality is you probably already have been a mentor. And you may not even realize it. So anytime you're sharing knowledge or experience with a new hire or with a friend, right, and sort of giving advice, you're mentoring in that respect. So I would just say, that the time is right whenever you have something to contribute to someone who doesn't have the same knowledge or expertise as you.
And I think that's something too, where you don't like get knighted and then get like a little badge or anything like that. It's just something where you've got perspective. And again, with a discipline that's moving so quickly, and especially for all of us in largely tech and largely SaaS, like the technology is moving quickly, the disciplines are moving quickly. What it takes to be successful now is maybe even different than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So being recognizing you probably have something to learn that you don't know. This is a question that comes up a lot. And I think sometimes bigger companies struggle with this and are successful with this. The idea of your manager being your mentor. I've heard of this before. I think I've got a lot of opinions on it, but Junan, let's start with you on this one. Should your manager be your mentor? Should your manager be a mentor? Should you have mentors outside of your manager? Tell us a little bit about your thought process on that.
So I have, for me personally, both as a mentee and as a mentor, I have had a mentee when I was their manager, as well as a mentor when they were my manager. I would say, there's a lot of benefits in that like they completely understand the context. They, you have firsthand knowledge of like their strengths and their weaknesses because you work so closely with them. So you can get a little bit deeper. There are certainly drawbacks to that though, because it doesn't, it's a lot harder to get a diverse set of perspectives because you're still kind of working together in that same swim lane. I think actually what's most interesting is a lot of the relationships of the manager that is a mentor, that tends to actually continue after you have been working together. And that actually, for me personally, both as a mentor and as a mentee, that is actually where more of the fruitful conversation and the discussion happens, is actually after we're working together. We've since moved on into different companies. I think that's a great area, but I would kind of be careful, and you almost need to think about if you do have the manager, just making sure that you diversify.
I think that's an important point too. Like it's tough to get, you can get really deep subject matter and context of maybe why or how something was the way it was, but you miss that kind of outside perspective. Like, well, that's interesting. We don't do it that way over here. Or we've approached that problem differently, and here's why. Question came in. This is a great live question. How does an organization get started with a mentorship program? Is there a organizational level? Every VP has to have a mentor. How have you seen this done before? Mary, let's start with you on this one. How can organizations get started?
So I think there's sort of two paths that I think all organizations can support. One is formal and one is informal. I think the informal, whether you use Teams channels, or Slack channels, that you can build mentorship opportunities. I know there's automation that I've seen before in Slack that sort of pairs people. Donut dates is something we called it. And so you can get some mentorship that way. From a formal perspective, I think organizations a lot of times look at the benefit of a program, right? What is the purpose of women in leadership, as an example, or first line manager mentorship opportunities. And they're able to formalize these programs around key objectives and then have people at the appropriate levels or, that meet the criteria apply and get support from their managers and things like that. So it's a pretty rigorous process, but it also culminates in very scripted expectations, which allow for a lot of benefit, right, to the people who are participating. It's a lot of time commitment, but the people that are committed know what to expect. So that's where I think an organization, can do well to have a multifaceted mentorship formal programs, but then offer those informal programs and channels for people to make those connections at all levels.
And I love the idea of donut dates, because what we were saying before was some of this is maybe I just need to learn a little bit more about this. And Mary, you're an expert. I'd love to understand more about how should I think about this? That's not, maybe I don't need 3 years of Mary's time to get to the understanding. Maybe it's just a couple donut. I like that, donut dates. Rolls off the tongue. I like that. Well, one more question. You started to hit on this a little bit, but Julianne, let's kick this over to you. Just the role of technology that technology can play with this, given most of us are just getting to the point where we could go on an in-person donut date together. But what's the role that technology, or what systems have you seen people use to effectively support mentorship programs?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, I think it's pretty simple. It's any way for you to facilitate the introduction. So what Mary was referencing, there's actually an app inside of Slack called Donut. And so it randomly pairs people together and makes the introduction. So that's I would say probably the biggest challenge with mentorship is getting that introduction, getting that initial conversation. So anything that helps break that down and kind of make that easier. Because then from there, it's like any other relationship. It can be through text, it can be through Slack, it can be email, phone, whatever. But I think breaking down any obstacles is going to be the most important part.
Yeah, I think that's where we've seen solutions like that where we can connect folks. I think some of the venture firms that run communities have blind speed dating based on challenges that you face or whatever. Those I think is where it is. But to answer your point, I don't think there's a ton here. I don't think that there needs to be a ton of technology here, because like you're saying, it could be as easy as a text message and some words of affirmation as I go into a presentation. It could be 15 minutes. I need to pick your brain on this one thing. I know you're really good at it. So I think back to what we've said kind of throughout is the intentionality about what you're hoping to get in, what you're hoping to get out of the mentorship. One more question here, and this is an interesting live question, and I want everyone's perspective on this. So this is Sally's live question that's in the queue. As a mentor, do you ever feel maybe offended or a little bit grumbly if someone on your team, you hear that they're reaching out for a mentor and they're not coming to you? Do you expect somebody on your team to come with you first for advice? And I want everyone's perspective on this. I'll be surprised if there's any dissent here, but Junan, what do you think on this?
Yeah, I'll start. I would say, so first off, I think as a manager, it's your job to coach and to mentor your team members. So like, they're probably, when they reach out to other teammates or to other teams, it's not that they aren't getting enough from you. I mean, I guess that could be the situation. That's a different conversation. But really, I think what's happening is like they're actually looking to diversify. And like we talked a lot about that around building this entire board. You don't just want one advisor. So I would say like you shouldn't take offense to that. Like that, if anything, like that should be a huge kind of testament to their passion and desire to grow.
Yeah, Mary, Haley, anything else to add on that?
I echo that. I get really thrilled when I hear that people on my entire team, have reached out and have found mentorship, whether it's formal or informal, outside of sort of our chain of command, if you will, right? Because it does mean the diversity of thinking, they're bringing back even into the innovation of our own team, but also they're getting a different perspective and sort of a different, avenue of innovation or development that, we maybe couldn't provide at the time. So I think that's great.
Back to some of what we said about the goals, right? Bringing a new perspective into the workplace isn't a bad thing at all. It feels like that's a huge win in a lot of ways. Folks, we're kind of at time here. I'd love to just get one key takeaway from each of you when you think about mentorship and how to be an effective mentor, how to be an effective mentee. Haley, let's start with you on this.
Yeah, I just want to, just exaggerate once again that I think mentorship and having a mentor is highly beneficial. And anyone can pursue this. You like Junan, he's a director of customer success and Mary's a CCO, but they probably still have mentors, where they're at in your career. Anyone can have a mentor, anyone can be a mentee. Like, don't be afraid to have these conversations and get these going.
Love it. Mary?
Yeah, I would just say the one thing is just don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to put yourself, out there for someone that you think can be helpful to you. And again, formal or informal, just go for it.
I'll take us home. Yeah, we've used a lot of analogies today, like dating, board of advisors, but I think like a mentorship relationship is like any other relationship. There are going to be some relationships that work out, and there are going to be some that aren't a fit and don't work out or maybe fizzle. And so you don't build a board of advisors overnight. You don't have a long-term relationship overnight. And so you kind of have to put yourself out there. And to Mary's point, don't be afraid to ask.
This is a great conversation, really, really meaty topic. I appreciate you all taking some time today to share your perspectives and your stories on this. On behalf of everybody in attendance, the folks watching on YouTube, thank you so much for your time. I know you're incredibly busy and this was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, y'all.